Friends, what is up and welcome back to the Loosely Bound YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing a little review and synopsis of Later by Stephen King. So I just recently finished listening to Later by Stephen King as an audiobook on Audible, and from the first 5 minutes that I started listening to Later, I was immediately so drawn in, and that made me so excited because I've been in such a reading slump lately. I feel like I've only been picking very average books. So to find a new book that I was so quickly drawn into was just very, very exciting for me. One of the first things that I noticed about Later when I bought it on Audible was that it's only a 6.5 hour book, which most of the books that I listen to are anywhere from like 12 to 40 hours. And I feel like especially for a novel from Stephen King, 6.5 hours is very, very short. If you read it as a physical book, I'm not exactly sure how many pages it has, but I was able to listen to this very, very quickly because 1, it was so short, 2, I listened to it sped up a little bit, and 3, it was really just that good. Anytime that I sat down in my car or just had a spare minute, I was pulling it up because every second of my day I was wondering what was going to happen next, and I couldn't wait to find out. Later follows a young boy named Jamie Conklin and his mother Tia. His dad is not in the picture, so it's just him and his mom against the world. Even from a very young age, Tia knows that her son Jamie is not exactly like other kids. He has something else going on with him, and we quickly discover that Jamie is able to see dead people, but not like so much in the Sixth Sense movie, kind of like after someone dies, their spirit, their soul, kind of like a ghost, sticks around, but only for 3 days or so. So Jamie is able to see and interact with these dead people, but it really doesn't affect him too much because it's something that he's always been able to do. There are a few instances that are a little over the top for him, but for the most part, it's just something he can do, and it's never been a big deal. Even so, Tia advises Jamie to never really talk about it because it's just something so different. They don't really want it getting out. They don't want people being scared of Jamie or taking advantage of him for what he can do. But even with that warning, it does get out that Jamie is able to communicate with dead people, and he is eventually roped into helping solve a crime case where there's a guy that's been bombing all of these buildings, and he ends up shooting himself and dying. So a police officer in the NYPD ropes Jamie in to helping her communicate with this dead killer to find out where he has planted his last bomb. This communication does not go how Jamie's typical communications go, and total horror ensues from there. Now, you guys know that I don't like to give too much away, so as far as the details go, I'm going to leave it there, but I will say that if you are a fan of Stephen King, you have got to check Later out. Like with any other Stephen King book, his character development is so stunning and just mind-boggling. Every time I read or listen to something by Stephen King, I'm like, wow, why does this guy at the gas station that we interact with for 3 minutes, why do I know his entire backstory? But that's just one of the elements that Stephen King can really bring to a novel to make it seem extremely realistic, and it just adds that extra layer to any story, especially in Later. I also did really enjoy that this was not a super long book, because sometimes, even though I love Stephen King's character development, sometimes that can make his books stretch out to where they're like 40 hours long, which can get a little tiring, but I think Later was such an amazing length. I definitely didn't feel shorted. I felt like I had such a good, thorough story told to me, but it was just nice to be able to kind of get in, get the plot, figure out everything that happens, and then get out. The power that Jamie has is just such a cool power too, to be able to see and interact with dead people is just something that, even though it's not like a totally unheard of plot point, it's still just a really, really cool one, and it's absolutely fascinating to read about, listen to, and just kind of learn how that affects his life. And my absolute favorite part of Later is that throughout the book there's tiny little snippets and literary references to It by Stephen King. The older movie version of It was the first real horror movie that I ever watched in my life, and it scared me to death, but even so, it holds a very close place in my heart. And I also listened to the audiobook version of it a few years ago, and it was just such a fantastic story. Hearing these little references coming into play from it that also just show up in later was so cool to me, because they weren't big, significant pieces. They were very little literary pieces of things that are referenced in it, and they come back up in later. And it was just such a cool little, like, it almost felt like a fan Easter egg that if you haven't read it, it's not gonna affect how you perceive later. But if you have read it, and to hear these little tidbits come up in later, you're like, oh my gosh, that is so cool, because I remember that happening from it. So that was hands down my favorite part. Even if it hadn't had those little literary references from it, later would still be an amazing story on its own. But I feel like having those little morsels in there just really elevated it so much for me as a Stephen King fan, and it just made me so happy. I gave Later 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads because I just was blown away from start to finish. There is also a really cool twist at the end that I felt like wasn't even necessary, but again, it was just one of those elements that really pushed Later over the top and really took it to a next level reading or listening experience. Like I said, I listened to it on Audible, and I listened to the version read by Seth Numerick. I believe that's the only audiobook version right now, but I'm sure more will come into play. So if you want to listen to the version that I listened to, I will post a link down in the description box so you can easily find that. And if you have read or listened to Later, please leave a comment down below and let me know if you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!